that you can get
Right.
get to us for June talks about how you build up
Absolutely.
on your Chesapeake work. And
That's exactly right. CNG as well
Good.
as LNG.
all right, let me
Great.
recognize Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening a great conversation around the vital role that America's expanding natural gas resources can play in our energy future. If you'll forgive me, I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee as well, and we are in the midst of what some may know is
Non-controversial issue.
a very easy, really, we're going to have this all hammered out by lunchtime, we think. I'm joking, sadly. We have 300 amendments. I think we've made it through 34 so far after 10 hours of work. So if I might just briefly, I came out of manufacturing and am very excited about the implications for manufacturing, one of our more energy-intensive sectors. And so whether it's chemical manufacturing or it's tires or it's glass or it's steel, the dramatic increase in natural gas pricing and reliability, I think, is a real driver. Folks from the American Chemistry Council shared with me a list of between 80 and $100 billion worth of new facilities that are being either sited or reshored, as it were, onshored. In one particularly compelling case, I thought a story of a plant being lifted up from Chile and barged back to the United States for production. So some of them are completely new, some of them are expansions, and different associations score it differently, whether it's 75, 80, or 100 billion. But that is a really dramatic investment in infrastructure. What are the most important aspects of infrastructure to deliver and to access this expanding supply that will be essential to accelerating that renaissance in American energy-intensive manufacturing? I'll take an answer from anyone.
I'm sorry, your question was what is needed?
What do we need to do to develop further the infrastructure necessary to match this investment in the manufacturing capabilities?
Okay. Yeah, I think one thing that everyone needs to be aware of is it's not just expanding the infrastructure for natural gas gathering or natural gas transmission. It's really a full value chain. When E&P producers drill for oil and gas, you have to build the infrastructure for the disposition of the oil, the condensate. The natural gas itself has to be treated for inerts. It has to be processed for NGLs. The NGLs have to be transported and fractionated and then cracked to make plastic and rubber products and exported or consumed in housing and auto and so forth. So it's not just the gas infrastructure that really needs to be enhanced, but it's the whole vertical value chain that has to be looked at. But there is an abundance of natural gas out there. It's affordable, it's clean burning. There's a lot of it we can't get to due to permitting processes have delayed us, enforcement process have delayed us in getting to the production. So the gas that's being flared, you're actually flaring the raw gas, which includes all the natural gas liquids. And if you think about it, once gas is processed and natural gas liquids are extracted, 85% of those natural gas liquids are never combusted if you can get them to market to produce polyethylene and polypropylene. But if you're flaring at the wellhead, you're wasting economic value, you're creating emissions, and you're combusting components that you shouldn't be combusting. But I guess my answer to you is that, regulation, reasonable regulation that would work with us, that used to take 30, 60 days for permitting processes is now taking 18 months. And so it's delaying us getting to the production, and it's curtailing natural gas, and it's slowing development from E&P producers.
So capturing the entire value, the wet gas as well as the dry gas, the feedstock as well as the sort of raw energy requires an entire value chain, and you would cite permitting as the single biggest barrier to a timely and appropriate utilization of that whole range of value out of these newly expanded resources.
It has been the increasing burden on the industry. Like I said, we've gone from 60 days to get a permit to build a plant, now it's 18 months. You can't start construction until you get your permit. And then once you get your permit, it takes a good 12 months to build the plants. And so it's not just pipeline transmission. So instead of 12 months to execute on some major pipeline and processing plant to get the natural gas in the transmission lines, now you're looking at 2 to 3 years.
Let me move, if I might, to a second question about those gas transmission lines. There's about 300,000, I think, if I read right, miles of gas transmission lines. Transmission lines for the whole, some of it's liquid, some of it's gas, some of it's different fractions. And a great deal of these have been financed using master limited partnerships. As some of you may know, I've introduced a bipartisan bill. It's in the House and the Senate. It's got Republican and Democrat support in both chambers. to open up the master limited partnership financing structure to energy efficiency, to coal sequestration, to power storage, to combined heat and power, to wind, to solar, to frankly every possible form of renewable energy. And I think this is a way to make good on our challenge to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy that doesn't pick winners and losers, and to sustain this valuable capital formation tool. What, if any, impact do you think it would have on the ability of the natural gas industry to access and utilize MLPs, to have it also open to other forms of energy? We've got three gentlemen right there who could answer this question with great knowledge and a good basis, in fact. Mr. Santa.
Senator Coons, you're right. The interstate pipeline industry and overall pipelines have benefited from the master limited partnerships. It's been a very efficient way to raise capital, and it's resulted in real infrastructure, real steel in the ground that has benefited the nation. The board of directors of INGA has not discussed nor taken any position on the issue of expanding the scope of the MLPs. I have no reason to believe that expanding it would somehow dilute the capital that would be available to interstate natural gas pipelines. But again, the board has not taken a position on the specific issue.
And it's my understanding as well that it would not have any negative impact on the current substantial users of this structure. It would simply solidify it, broaden it, strengthen it. But to the extent anyone's got input for me, positive or negative, I'm happy to take it. Here's your window.
Just
3,
one
2,
thought. I want to pick up on one of the phrases you used towards the end there, which is all the above energy policy. And I think that's one that we see resonate a lot around the world. 70% of our customer base is outside the U.S. And I think the two biggest resource bases that energy ministers outside the U.S. say about the U.S. right now is the potential use of, obviously, the natural gas, and the other which is the U.S. is Saudi Arabia of wind. And if you think about long-term predictable energy policy, that's one thing that your all-of-the-above strategy, supports. I think that makes sense. It also then fuels load growth. One of the issues with new investment is load growth. And that fuels that investment, and that pulls along then the natural gas infrastructure that's required. So I would just want to reinforce your point on all the above energy policy. I think that does drive a lot of what makes sense, and then the markets will kind of lead what makes sense going from there.
Thank you. And
Senator Coons, I would agree with Mr. Santa that in the natural gas MLP world, it has generated or attracted a significant amount of capital, especially through private equity, to develop infrastructure. And I think expanding it to renewable energies, we would have no objections to that. I think it'd be a good thing.
$450 billion in capitalization now. It strikes me as a proven, predictable way to raise capital for expensive infrastructure, and why we wouldn't expand it to all the different forms of energy in the United States.
Absolutely.
Beats me, strikes me as good policy.
Yes,
To Mr. Bowles' point, globally, I also serve on foreign relations and spoke earlier today about Africa's significant need for energy stability and security. We've got a great deal of technology, of know-how represented in this room that we can and should be exporting, not just energy exporting, but energy knowledge and energy technology exporting. It's my hope that that'll also be part of our future conversations. Thank you very much for your contributions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for letting me.
What's striking
briefly
about the good work that Senator Coons is doing, as you all know, it really isn't a Senate discussion unless senators say that they are for all of the above on energy at least 3 times every 10 minutes or so. I mean, it's almost a obligatory requirement. But what Senator Coons has done is really move us, in my view, in the direction of sort of one of the key reforms of the future, and that is really parity as it relates to the various energy sources. In other words, if we do want to have that filling station of the future where all of these different fuels compete against each other and create a marketplace, we can't in effect have a tax code where some of the incentives are up here and other incentives are over here. And I'm also on the Finance Committee. I've authored a bipartisan tax reform proposal, so if you're having trouble sleeping tonight, you can read that. What Senator Coons is doing in terms of his master limited partnerships is really talking about an approach that locks in this notion of parity, and I think it very much ought to be part of the tax reform debate, and I appreciate my colleague. And know you got your hands full this morning. We thank you for coming. Let me turn now to one of the questions that has extraordinary implications for the economy and the energy field. For example, renewables, which is something I care enormously about. Mr. Cantor and the folks at Demler know in Oregon, we sort of have green energy in our chromosomes, and we're very much committed to wind and to solar and all of these alternative resources. And the link between gas and electric and the development of renewables is going to be absolutely pivotal. Now, Mr. Prohaska, in his testimony, really lays out the obvious and says it, I think, in an interesting way. You all can't build infrastructure on spec. I mean, it doesn't work that way. And Mr. Van Welle basically says that generators lack the incentives to buy long-term firm service of the kind that allows Mr. Prohaska, in effect, to get out there with more infrastructure. Let's open this up to the panel. How is this kind of dilemma best resolved so that generators get reliable service without, in effect, having to get hit with the most expensive option, which of course gets passed on to the consumers. So what can be done to address this kind of issue? And let's, Mr. Van Welle, good.
So I was struck by the conversation a few minutes ago about ensuring sort of equal access to the marketplace for all fuels. And if you think about the job that we perform, what we do is try and uphold that principle, which is a competitive market where different generators using different fuels can actually supply the electricity that we need. And so from our perspective, the way to solve the problem that you raise, we need to make sure that there are sufficiently strong incentives for generators to make the necessary fuel arrangements. And incentives really come in two forms. The one is making sure that as the fuel prices change within the operating day, that those fuel prices can be reflected in the energy prices, the electric energy prices, and that when we get into shortage conditions, scarcity conditions, when we've got a problem on the system, that the prices in the energy market are high enough to actually reflect the fact that we're in trouble, because that creates a positive financial incentive to generators to chase that price and make sure they've got the fuel to be able to chase that price. At the same time, if we're making a forward payment, which is what these capacity markets are all about, it's a bit like making a reservation with a manufacturing facility to produce electricity, and you're making a forward payment. If the generator doesn't produce electricity for you when you call on them, you'd think you'd want your money back. And so I think we've got to create that financial consequence there so that the generator's economic incentives are changed, so that they would say, I don't want to lose that forward payment. I would rather invest in some fuel infrastructure to make sure I can run when I'm called upon. So if we can get that done, it will create a demand for fuel services by the generators. They will want to go buy some fuel of some form to make sure that they can produce electricity for us when we need it. And I think it's the starting point in a long daisy chain of actions that then have to take place. The next question, I think, is, okay, if we've created the demand for these fuel services, who's actually going to step up and contract or build the fuel infrastructure? Because the generator has many choices. The gas generator could put in dual fuel capability. They could sign up with an option to procure fuel from storage from an LNG tank, or they could sign up for a slice of a new pipeline. And I think the regulatory conundrum which the state regulators in New England are thinking through is, if they're going to invest in pipeline capacity to support heating customers, does it make sense to upsize that investment to also support electric generation and then sell this additional capacity back to electric generators? So that's the sort of concrete thought that's on the table in New England. But it requires actions by more than just the ISO. We've got to get our
Who else has to act to be useful to this?
I think
logical sounding cause.
Well, I think clearly, obviously, the pipelines, I think, are willing to respond when there's a demand for from a customer. And the issue is, who's going to be the customer for the pipeline in New England? And it seems to me that the right answer is the gas generators, but they're unlikely to become the customer because they don't think that far out into the future. And so they might sign up for a slice of pipeline capacity on their own, but I think the folks that are going to have to nudge this forward are going to be the state regulators and the New England governors.
Yes, sir, Mr. Santa.
Chairman Wyden, let me add to Mr. Vanwelli's answer. First of all, the dilemma that you talk about does not exist across the country. That one of the things that became apparent from the FERC technical conferences last summer is that in those regions of the country where the markets are bilateral markets, where it remains vertically integrated utilities, generally those companies have the ability to purchase a portfolio of pipeline and storage services to match up with their gas-fired generation and recover that in their rates that are approved by the state commissions. And this is not intended as a comment on the relative merits of the organized markets versus the vertically integrated markets, but nonetheless, it's a problem that's somewhat unique to the organized or restructured markets. As Mr. Vanwelli said, I think one of the dilemmas here is how do you put a price on reliability? I mean, clearly there is a tremendous value to reliability. Think about the cost that a region would incur if there were to be a major blackout. We've seen that. It's been quantified. And then once you say, let's put a value on it, who pays for it? To what degree can, as Mr. Vanwelli suggests, would the generators sign up for it? To what degree, given that everyone benefits from reliability and everybody suffers if it's not there, do you somehow socialize that cost across all electricity customers? And also, as he partly alluded to, we kind of have this